Mem Zayin, Amud Aleph, page 47a. We've been learning this discussion. We've been talking about the law of the law of dwelling in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, and at the same time not making a bracha, not reciting a bracha when we dwell in the sukkah. And this, of course, was a big topic, and it is a big topic. Of a lot of ink has been spilled on this matter, especially among the Achronim, the later commentaries. And but that seems to be the conclusion of the Gemara, that you do have to dwell in the sukkah, but you do not recite a bracha. We did find a few heterim, at least defenses for the leniencies. We saw a Tosfos over here. You mentioned there's a Karban Asanel, there's a Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz, there's a Sfas Emes. Basically different heterim, either because it might be, it looks like Minag Choil, it's a Zilzol and Yom Tov dwelling in the sukkah, and possibly Bal Tosef. And so there would be reason. There could be reason to be matir, to be lenient, if it's uncomfortable, if it's it doesn't look like it doesn't look like you're enjoying it, so you're really being mazalzel. The sort of like the ability to dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres is almost like a heter, because the sukkah seems to be areva, something pleasant. However, if a person were to shake lulav, that would be a zilzal and yom tov. That would be a disgrace for yom tov. Now, the Gemara now continues, and it talks about before we do the Gemara. So then we had that was based on Tosfos. And so then there's room to say that if it's like very uncomfortable, you wouldn't be able to, you wouldn't be obligated, maybe you wouldn't be allowed to dwell in the sukkah. The same thing would apply. The same thing we seem to find with Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz seems to have says at night you don't sit in the sukkah because it's too cold, but by day then you can sit in the sukkah. Again, based on the same lie, seems to be based on the same lie. Then we had the Sfas Emes that said that it could be the Gemara doesn't mean an obligation, but it's more of a heter. Can you all hear me? Because there's a lot of background noise. You can hear me clearly? Yeah. Okay. So that was the other little leniency that defense, I should say. Okay. Then come the next Gemara. We're talking about reciting Shechiyam, and this, of course, is also a very interesting topic because it is a contradiction. Why for Shmini Atzeres do we not say? Do we say Shechiyanu, Shmini Atzeres? But for Pesach, for Shmini Shel Pesach, the final day of Pesach, we do not say Shechiyanu. Of course, it's something that brings up a dilemma, a surprise. Why is that? It applies, of course, to lighting Shabbos candles, and when you say Kiddush. The women say their Shechiyanu by Yom Tov candles. And the men say it by Kiddush, and both. We don't say it for Shvi Shel Pesach. And so here the Gemara seems to be sort of endeavoring to answer that question, because this is Rabbi Yochanan's statement. Rabbi Yochanan, now the Gemara is struggling, grappling why that is. When do we? What would the reason be? Why would there be a difference? So we have Rabbi Levi bar Chama or Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, who they want to say that the reason is because you see a difference in the sukkah lulav and nisach hamayim, that like it changes when it comes to shmini atzeres, meaning you don't dwell in the sukkah, you don't dwell, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, of course, you would dwell in the sukkah, you don't shake the lulav, and you don't pour the nisach hamayim. And because of that, there's reason to say that this is a Yom Tov b'fnei atzmai. This is the Yom Tov on its own, and it would not obligate a Shehachiyanu. It would obligate a Shehachiyanu because it's a Yom Tov of its own, versus Shvi Shal Pesach, where everything is the same as Pesach. Now, what about Nisoch Hamayim is not so simple, because Nisoch Hamayim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you do pour the water pouring even on Shmini Atzeres. So according to him, you still have the fact that there's no sukkah and there's no lulav. And so because of that, that would be a reason to say that when we have a Yom Tov on Shmini Atzeres and it's not going to have the sukkah in the lulav, there's reason to say it deserves a shehachiyanu. And even though, we do dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, just like I concluded the previous Gemara saying we do dwell in the sukkah. So what is the of this that we don't dwell in the sukkah? The meaning is that the only reason we dwell in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres is because of the possibility that the 8th day is really the 7th day. But in essence, if it's the 8th day, you for sure do not dwell in the sukkah. So the concept of the 8th day must be a holiday of its own right, and it deserves a shehachiyanu, because the holiday of the 8th day you don't dwell in the sukkah on the 8th day. Now, the Gemara says, Pesach also, you do find a difference. If you want to base it on these differences, then you could say there is a difference with Shvi Shal Pesach as well, because Shvi Shal Pesach, there's no mitzvah to have matzah. In fact, the pasuk says, Sheishis Yomim Teichol Matzah. 6 days you eat matzah. So the Gemara says, it's the 7th day you're not mechuyev to. So the Gemara says it must be Rishus. And then the Gemara says, if the 6 days, 7 days Rishus, Mashvi Rishus, Afshisha Rishus, also the first 6 days are also optional for matzah. But basically, the pasuk implies like the 7th day is as optional for matzah. Now, we know that the first night is an obligation of matzah. And if that's so, being so, you see a big difference between Shvi Shal Pesach, the last day of Yom Tov, and the first day of Yom Tov. There is a difference. And that would be reason to say this is a Yom Tov B'fnei Atzmo. This is a holiday of its own right. So the Gemara says, the Gemara asks this question, and the Gemara says that there's really a few differences. First, the Gemara says, Hachi Hashta, here it's different because there's a difference between the night that you could say the first night you do have an obligation to eat matzah, and now on Shvi Shal Pesach you don't have an obligation to eat matzah. It's optional. True, but how about the first day? Compare it to the first day. Is it any different? No, it's really the same. The first day of Pesach, there's no mitzvah to eat matzah either. So if you compare it to the first day, you have the same law. That is basically optional. So you can't say that the 7th day of Pesach is very different than the other days. Then the Gemara says, that Ravina says, it's also, you can't say that the 7th day of Pesach is different than the day before it, because it's no different than the 6th day. Maybe it's different than the first night, which is lifnei panav. It's much earlier. It's different than something much earlier, but it's not different than the day before. So the first answer is it's different than the first day. It's not different than the first day. Second answer is no different than the 6th day. So therefore, there's reason to say that it's part of the same holiday, and it would not be a Yom Tov b'fnei atzmo. Then the Gemara says that other reasons, and one of them is that it says Shmini Atzeres, how many cows do you bring? How many, not cows, oxen, well, car is the bull. How many bulls? So it says parechot on Shmini Atzeres. On the other days of Sukkot, we go from 13 to 12 to 11 to all the way down, and there's altogether 70. And so what we see is there it says parim, and maybe I should read this inside. Okay, Jeffrey, you wanna ask something or say something?
No. Yeah, I just that when you come down to 7, that's the end. So the parim are 7, and then all of a sudden the 8th day it's just 1.
Right. It's a big gap. So you see, it's a different holiday. You see, it's a regal b'fnei atzmo. Yes. Okay. Good. So let me read it inside. We are on page 47a. We're going to start with Amar Rav Papa. Amar Rav Papa. It's about maybe 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. Amar Rav Papa. Hachak siv par, hasam siv parim. Here, it says par by Shmini Atzeres, and there by the sacrifices of the different days of Sukkot, it says parim, which is a plural, which means there's many, and it is many. It altogether adds up to 70 in just 7 days. And how do you get 70 in 7 days? It's not all the same, but it goes from 13 to 12 to 11, all the way down to 7. And so you see that it sort of jumps the numbers, and therefore it must be a holiday in its own right. Because if it was not, you should do 6 on the 8th day, because it went from 13 to 12 to 11, all the way down to 7. And then comes the 8th day, you should do 6. And what do we do? 1. So because we do 1, it does imply that this is a holiday of its own right. And that's why it's not following the rhythm, the symmetrical, the style that was being used on Sukkot. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok, Rav Nachman says, "Hachak siv bayoyim, hasam siv ubayoyim." Here on Shmini Atzeres it says bayoyim hashmini, and all the other days of the Sukkot holiday, it constantly says of vav before ubayoyim, in on the second day, and on the third day, and on the fourth day. And so what we see from here is that the last day, meaning the Shmini Atzeres day, is really a different entity. It's a different holiday than the other days, because those days are attached to each other with the vav that attaches each paragraph to the paragraph before. Rav Ashi Amar Hafak Siv Kamishpat. Here by Shmini Atzeres, it says Kamishpat in Hasam Siv Kamishpatam, and there it says Kamishpatam, that it's implying there, meaning on the 7th day of Sukkot, it gives a hint that this concludes this section, or this this part of the holiday. This concludes this holiday. It's the nisachim, the libations are according to their mishpat, according to the rules of all of the previously brought libations. And that's what it means when it says Kamish Batam on the 7th day, which is actually an extra mem that the Gemara says. It means the Nisoch HaMayim. It's like a hint for the Nisoch HaMayim. But anyway, that mem also shows us that it's sort of an end to the, or maybe this opinion doesn't agree with the other opinion that it's hinted, or it's just a hint, I guess. But the fact that it has a mem there implies that what comes next is a separate entity. Here it only says to Mishpat by the 8th day. The 7th day, it makes almost like a line saying, this is over. Now we finished with these sacrifices. Now we're starting something new, a new holiday. The Mishpatam. Now comes the Gemara and says, well, let's bring another brisa. The other brisa is is going to be, we're going to see if this could be a proof to explain this could be a proof to say that you need to say Shechiyah. What's the brisa? So Lema Messiah, let's say this is a proof. Again, what Rabbi Yochanan said was a somewhat revolutionary. He's saying, oh, Shmi Shal Pesach, there's no Shechiyah. Shmini Atzeres, there is a Shechiyah. Let's try to bring a proof from the brisa to what you're saying. You're saying a big chiddush, something very innovative. So it says, let's say this is the proof to it. So there's a brisa, Tosefta. Says, what's the Tosefta? Tosefta says, it says that when you bring these different sacrifices on, and in one of them you're not going to bring, basically they're all part of the same. They all fall into the same. They all are part of the same group of sacrifice. If you miss one, don't bring any. Um, like you need to have all of them. If you're missing one, then don't bring any of the sacrifices. Rabbi Yehuda, so that's the first statement. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Parim ein ma'akven zeh." The bulls are not ma'ak of each other. They don't. They're not dependent on each other. Because we see that they get less and less, and therefore, even if you're missing one that the Torah tells you to bring on that day, it doesn't mean you can't bring the others, because you see the numbers they anyway are getting less, so it doesn't have to be exact. That if you, of course, it should be exact, but if it's not ma'akiv. It doesn't ruin your mitzvah. Bring the others. Amru Lai. So the rabbis told Rabbi Yehuda, Aloy Kulon, but all of them, even the rams and the kvasim, the sheep, mismatin v'hokin b'shmini, they do get less on the 8th day, because all 7 days, what do we bring? 2 elim, 2 rams, and 14 kvasim, 14 sheep. And on Shmini Atzeres, we bring 1 ram and 7 kvasim, 7 sheep. And so it's a huge difference. And according to what you're saying, it should be that the other animals, even not the bulls, should also not be dependent on each other, because we see that it's not the same number on the 8th day versus the other days. So we see that there's a difference in numbers, and that is, according to your logic, Rabbi Yehuda, that you hold that if there's a change in the number of sacrifices, the different days, that shows that if it happened to be missing one, no problem. Bring the others. Bring what you got. So do that with the Elim and the Kvasim, just like you're saying about the Parim, about the bulls. Do that with the rams and the sheep. So Amru Lai, so the rabbis told Rabbi Yehuda, they told him this thing that so they told him on the 8th day they all get less. So according to your logic, so nothing should be ma'akiv, nothing should be dependent on each other. Everything is just bring what you got. So Amar Lahen, Rabbi Yehuda answers them back. He says, no, I only say it about the parim, about the bulls. I don't say it about the other animals. Because even though you're telling me that on the 8th day there's a difference, Shmini is regular. They ask me who the 8th day is a different holiday. That just like the 7 days of Sukkot need a certain sacrifices. This year, and they need a song that goes along with the sacrifices, and bracha, and they have a bracha. Each of there's a bracha for those days of the holiday, which we'll soon see what that bracha is. Velina, and you need to stay overnight. Whichever day you bring the chagiga, you got to stay overnight. If you brought it on one of the days, during the other days, you also have to stay overnight. And so the same thing is Af Shmini Toon Karban. So the 8th day, Shmini Atzeres, also has its karban. In other words, this is a holiday of its own. It has its karban, which is the par echad, ayil echad, shiva kvasim, and the this year, and it has its song of the day, and it's not part of the Sukkot songs. Tyson brings over here that they would sing Lam Natzech al Hashminas. I guess it's a play on the word Shminas, the Shmini Atzeres. But anyway, So it needs a shear, a special shear for itself. Shmini Atzeres. Ubracha, and we'll soon see what bracha refers to, but it does deserve its own bracha for itself. And velina, and you do have to stay overnight. Might say yomtiv to stay overnight, even if you didn't bring a sacrifice, you would stay overnight, and it is you're obligated to do lina, which is like don't run out of Yerushalayim. You stay overnight. So my lab, what does this mean? As bracha. So that concludes basically the brisa. And now the Gemara says, now what bracha are we talking? My lab, Zman. It's probably talking about the bracha of Shachiyanu. So what do we see? We see that there's a source that you say a Shachiyanu on Shmini Atzeres. And so if that's so, now it is a little surprising there. What the Gemara is saying, we see from Reb Yehuda that it has a bracha of its own. Shivas Me'achag have a bracha, and Shmini Atzeres has a bracha. The Gemara is thinking, we have a proof, Shachiyanu. Now, this is Reb Yehuda's opinion. The rabbis seem to argue, because the rabbis said, the rabbis didn't say this whole drasha. The rabbis said only Purim have this rule of Ma'akir, I'm sorry, Reb Yehuda said only Purim have this rule, and the rabbis were arguing with Reb Yehuda. But the point is that the rabbis held Purim Elam and Tvasim are Ma'akiv Zezah, and the rabbis even said that they told Rabbi Yehuda that if you look at Shmini Atzeres, you see that there's also an element of mismat in Vaholchin based on Shmini Atzeres. So the rabbis imply like it's the same holiday. Rabbi Yehuda goes and says, no, it's a different holiday, and he proves it. So what it seems that the Gemara is saying is that because the rabbis don't answer back, it seems that they agreed to some extent to Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, we do have a proof that it deserves its own Shechiyanu. It gets a bracha in its own right. It gets a bracha Shechiyanu. And
indicating that it's separate from the previous yontif.
Indicating that it's separate from the previous yontif, exactly. But our main point is not to prove that it's separate; it's to prove that that's a Shechiyanu. The fact that it's a separate yontif, that's a reason why it should get its own bracha Shechiyanu. But we see from his wording that it has its own bracha Shechiyanu. So that sounds like Rabbi Yochanan's halacha. Sounds like Rabbi Yochanan's halacha. So my lav, that refers to Zman, the bracha of Zman, which is the Shechiyanu bracha. And you say a bracha thanking Hashem for the time. Hashem has given us life until this time, and we live until this time of this holiday. And so you say that bracha, it deserves its own Shechiyanu bracha. So the Gemara says, no, it doesn't refer to Shechiyanu loy. It gets its own individualized bracha for Berachas HaMazoin and Tefillah, meaning that you say es Yoim Shmini Atzeres HaChag or Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh. It gets its individualized mention of the holiday, and Hachenami Mistabra, and this also makes sense. The Isal Kadaita Zman Kol Shiva Miika. And the Gemara says it would seem that we must say this way, because what does he mean that you have a bracha on the first days of Sukkot? You don't say Shechiyanu every day. So why would it say that the first days? Let's go back to the Tosefta. It says over there, it's Tu'unin Karban Ubracha, the 7 days Shivas Me'achag are Tu'unin Bracha. So what does that mean? Shechiyanu? You don't say Shechiyanu every day. So it must mean that you say the Shmini the Chag HaSukkos Hazeh each day, and then for Shmini Atzeres you do Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. So each day you make emphasis of the specific Yom Tov that we're celebrating in the davening, in the benching, and that's what it's referring to. Because otherwise, why would it be? Why would you say that you mention the bracha on the first days of Sukkot? So the Gemara says, "Holoi kash." That this is not a real truth that he must mean this, because the Eloi Baruch Ha'idna Baruch L'Makar L'Yom Achrim. Because really, you could say that the bracha Shechiyanu is not recited every day, but it could be recited every day. Because the fact is that if you miss out on the bracha, on one of the first day, you say it on a different day. You say Shechiyanu, and therefore it's connected to any of the days of Sukkot. That would be the bracha to recite. You could say a Shechiyanu bracha because you reached the time of Sukkot. It still took it, and so the Gemara says,
because you're starting something, you don't do Shechiyanu 3 times even on the first day you do, but it's when you're starting the yontif that you're making the Shechiyanu, and that's all.
Yeah, but what happens if you miss it on the first time? You went into a sukkah.
The first time
you missed it.
Starting, you missed the first day, but the first day that you're makabel yontif is when you make Shechiyanu.
Yeah. No, but what happens if you're makabel yontif? You sat in your sukkah. But you missed the bracha Shechiyanu first few days. So then you want to say Shechiyanu. So the Gemara here is implying the Eloi Baruch Ha'idna. If you did not recite the bracha, and the understanding is, even if you should have said it, you were in a sukkah, but you didn't say the bracha Shechiyanu, you could make the bracha the whole throughout the Yom Tov, and so it's, even if you miss it on the first part of the holiday, you could say it throughout the Yom Tov, and that's what it means. It's shayah to any of the days of Yom Tov. That the bracha is connected to any of the days of Yom Tov, and it gets its own Shechiyanu bracha, and Shmini Atzeres would also get its own Shechiyanu bracha. So that would be the meaning. If you want to translate the Tosefta to mean Shechiyanu, it could fit. We don't have a proof that it doesn't mean Shechiyanu, but at the same time, there is another option to explain what the Tosefta means bracha, that it doesn't mean Shechiyanu. It might mean Birchas Hamazon and Tefillah. So there are two options of what Shechiyanu could mean. So the Gemara then says, and it asks an interesting question. It says, "Mikol Makom Kais Be'inam." And nevertheless, even if you don't, even if you miss Shechiyanu, and you want to say, okay, you're going to say Shechiyanu during Chol HaMoed because you missed it on the first day, the Gemara asks, but what do you mean? You can only say Shechiyanu on a Kais, and people don't have wine on Chol HaMoed. So what do you mean? You would say the bracha on another day. You don't. You can't. You don't. You need wine. So the Gemara says, "Leima Masayeh Rav Nachman." Let's say this is a proof to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman's Zman Oimrei Afilu Bashur. That Zman, the bracha Shechiyanu, you don't need a kais. You can say it even in the marketplace without wine. The Amrit Binan kais, because if you need a cup of wine, kais called Yom Mi'ika. People have a cup of wine any day. All the days of Yom Tov. So therefore, the understanding must be that it must be that Rav Nachman says you say Shechiyanu even without a kais. And this must be what Rabbi Yehuda would be saying, that you would say Shechiyanu on a different day of Sukkot, and you missed it the first day. You say it any day, even without a kais. It must be that's what he says. Tatzmir like Rav Nachman. The Gemara says no. Maybe Dilma Dikla like kais. Could be that he got a kais, and maybe he's not Tatzmir like Rav Nachman. And nevertheless, so you could translate it that way. That if you get a kais of wine on Chol HaMoed, you would say a Shechiyanu, and so it's possible to translate the Tosefta to mean that there is a Shechiyanu bracha on any of the days of Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres gets another Shachiyanu bracha. That's one way of learning it, and that would fit. That would be a proof to Rabbi Yochanan, who said this revolutionary idea that Shmini Atzeres gets a Shachiyanu, even though Shvi Shal Pesach doesn't. But the Gemara said it's not a real proof because there is another way of learning that it could mean a Berachas Hamazon or Tefillah type of bracha, meaning that you recite the Chag HaSukkos Hazeh, and you recite the Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh on each of the. They each get their own individualized holiday mentioned in the davening and in the Berachos Hamazon in the benching. Okay, now the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda said that Shmini Atzeres, you need to stay overnight. You need the lina. You can't just run home and that night. You got to stay overnight. The next day is when you can go. The Gemara says, "B'sava Rabbi Yehuda Shmini told lina." Really, he told you have to stay overnight in Yerushalayim. Well, Tanya, didn't we learn in a brisa? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Minayin LePesach Sheni She'ein Ton Lina. How do we know Pesach Sheni? Is the second Pesach, for those people who are tamei, they have to come to Yerushalayim and bring the korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni, a month later, and bring the korban Pesach on Yudalid Iyar, and then they slaughter it then, and then they eat it on Tesvav, the night of Tesvav. So that night they need lina. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, we have Bryce who reads it, says Pesach Sheni ein to lina. So you don't. It never says that you turn in the morning and go to your tent. And it says, 6 days you eat matzahs. And it says it right next to that. Only a holiday that needs 6 days of a holiday, that is when you need to have lina. A holiday that doesn't have 6 days of it, like meaning only Pesach, would need lina. And not, this would exclude other holidays. What would it exclude? So something else is ain only if it doesn't have this obligation of 6. L'me'ute mai, what is this excluding? So the Gemara says, Lav l'me'ute nami shmini shatag. Wouldn't this be excluding Shmini Atzeres? It's a one-day holiday, and it should not need lina. So why is Rabbi Yehuda and the Tosefta saying that it needs lina? So the Gemara says, Loy, it's not excluding Shmini Atzeres. L'me'ute Pesach Sheni. It's just excluding Pesach Sheni, the Kavosei, which is similar to it. That even though Pesach Rishon needs lina, but Pesach Sheni does not. So in other words, Shmini Atzeres, Shavuos, these would also need lina. And the Gemara says nothing I'm stop, but this also makes sense. Ditnan, because we learned in a Mishnah, Bikurim, Habikurim Tunin Karban. When you bring Bikurim, you have to bring with them a Karban Shlomim. So you bring the first fruits of the 7 species. You bring the Shlomim, the Shear, and you also have to sing when you bring the Leviim have to sing when they bring when the people bring the Bikurim, the Leviim sing Shear. And Tanufa that needs to be waved. You have to wave it in all 4 directions and up and down. The lina, and when they bring the bikurim, they also have to stay overnight in Yerushalayim after they bring it. So the Gemara says, Man shamet lei da'amar tnufa. Who is it that says that bikurim need tnufa? Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda, but Ta'amar told lina, and he says that the bikurim need to stay overnight. So if you need to stay overnight for bikurim, and bikurim is not a 6-day holiday. It's a one-time thing. So obviously, if you need lina, then it must be, if we're excluding something that doesn't have 6 days, it must mean that something similar to Pesach, even though Pesach needs lina, but that's only Pesach Rishon that is 6 days. Pesach Sheni, which is not 6 days, doesn't need. But other holidays that aren't 6 days, they also will need lina. It's just something similar to Pesach. When it says Pesach, Sheni doesn't need. The Tanyas we have a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, what is the meaning of the word v'hinachta? What is it implying when it says you should place it down by the bikurim? This refers to tenufa. that you need to bring bikurim, you need to do a waving. Maybe it means placing it down. Maybe it doesn't mean waving. So the Gemara says, when it says it says hanocha. It mentions placing down in a different passage. So what does it mean when it says vihinach toy? So this is a few psukim later. So it must mean zutmufa. This refers to the waving. So the Gemara says the Dilma Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. Maybe the Mishnah in Bikurim that it says Bikurim need lina and Tnufa is not Rebbe Yehuda. Maybe that's Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. And this will mess everything that we've just set up, because we're trying to prove that Rebbe Yehuda holds. We're trying to answer a question that the Tosefta says that Shemini Atzeres needs lina, and we had a contradiction because Rebbe Yehuda, the Tosefta was basically is Rebbe Yehuda speaking in the Tosefta. He said that it needs lina, and then we have another statement that Rebbe Yehuda holds that Shemini Atzeres would not, or a one-day holiday would not need lina, and so that was a contradiction. We tried to answer it that maybe it's just Pesach, that only something similar to Pesach. But now the Gemara says, and the Gemara tried to prove that with a case of Bikurim, and that we see Rabbi Yehuda does say Bikurim need lina. But the Gemara is now knocking all of that off maybe and saying, well, maybe the Mishnah of Bikurim is talking is Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and not Rabbi Yehuda. And that's where it mentions there that you need to have lina by Bikurim. But Rabbi Yehuda maybe would hold you need a 6-day holiday to have lina, and maybe Bikurim doesn't need lina. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, the tiny because we have a price. It says the kohen takes the basket from your hand. We made it teaches ala Bikurim shatuna tenufa, teaches that Bikurim need a waving. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, these are the words of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds that that you need to wave, just like Rabbi. We found a pasuk. We found a brisa that showed that Rabbi Yehuda held that. We also have a brisa that that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that you need tenufa, and maybe this is all according to him. And now we don't have a proof that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a one-day holiday does not need, or does need lina, and the only exception is Pesach Sheni. The Gemara says, "My time Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov." What's the reason of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that it needs tenufa? Asya yad yad mishlam. It needs to be waved. Why does the Bikurim need to be waved? He learns that there's Xer Shava Yad Yad Mishlam. It says that the kohen takes the basket miyodecha from your hand. It says your hands should bring the fire offering, the fire offering to Hashem. So it says that's by a shlomim, a covered shlom. So we compare the Bikurim to the shlomim. So it says yad yad. It says the word yad in both places. Matan koyin aflahalon koyin. Just like one of the Bikurim is talking about the koyin does the waving, here also koyin. Here also it says the koyin. Here also by shlomim, it's the waving is done by the koyin. Malahalon, just like over there by the shlomim, it's done by the bilam, malahalon bilam, that the waving is done by the owners, because it mentions the owners. Is Afkan here also Bikurim is the bilam. Okay, so how do you do that? Koyin menich yodit aftiad bilam menim. That the koyin waves
puts
it, puts the hand under the hand of the owner, and he does the waving. The Gemara says, okay, so that sort of just concludes this discussion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So what comes out is we don't have a proof that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Shmini Atzeres would from the Mishnah Bikurim that Shmini Atzeres would need lina, but we see he says it when he talks about Shmini Atzeres, but then when he talks about Pesach Sheni, he implies that maybe it doesn't need lina. So we do have a little question about Rabbi Yehuda. We have an answer, but we don't have a proof to the answer because we figured out that the Mishnah Bikurim could be Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So it didn't disprove everything. It didn't just mess us up, I should say. It just ruined our proof. And so the Gemara says in the end, "My havi Allah." So what's the conclusion about Shafiano and Shmini Atzar? Nachmar Oimim Zman Shmini Shachag. Rachel says you say Shafiano. Reb says Zama Ein Oimim Zman Shmini Shachag. He says you don't. Valil says Oimim Zman Shmini Shachag. The halacha is that you say Shafiano and Shmini Atzeres. Okay, we're going to stop here. Zay gesund, everyone.
Maybe have a
day.
safe flight.
Amen.
Nesiya Tova.
Amen. Amen.
And think of us. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, Zay gesund, everyone.